Hello everyone, I am Nu-Trix the Synth guy and welcome to another video on synthesis. Well, I am actually bouncing off a question I received from my last week video on the Novation Peak, and somebody was asking a little bit more question about how to use the FM feature from the oscillator. So today I'll give you my best tips on how to use FM synthesis or FM features in a synthesizer that is not dedicated FM synth. Example, the Nova Peak. It does FM, but it's not an FM synth. It's still a subtractive synthesizer. You got to understand that FM synthesis is coined by Yamaha for the DX7 as being a synth that would only create sound by using FM. FM stands for frequency modulation, which is basically an oscillator modifying another oscillator. It's like an LFO that you would use, but it would vibrate within the range that we actually hear. So it's an oscillator because a low frequency oscillator in LFO is under these frequencies usually. So it's basically the same principle. It's just that when you look at a synthesizer like the DX7, the logic is to say it's not a subtractive synth. There is no filter. There's only modulation, and how much you modulate will change the shape of the oscillator receiving the modulation, and thus making it more complex and bring it for it more timbre changes and evolution of timbres. In an FM synth, you have two names for the oscillators. They're called operator. First of all, they're not oscillators, they're operators. It's a digital synthesizer. In the case of the DX7, the operators can either be carriers that carries the modulation or modulators that modulates the other one. So in our case, let's say we talk about the Novation Peak. Well, we don't have that difference because they're both oscillators. First tip is that FM synthesis is basically frequency modulation. It's like LFO modulation, but at a higher pitch, okay? Higher frequency range. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that if you want to be able to actually do it well, you should use, if you want to do it like the DX7, you should use only sine waves, nothing else. Now, of course, if you know and you're comfortable with using sine waves and you can create stuff that you like, you can then change the shape of the oscillators, either carrier or modulator, to a more complex waveform. That's your choice, go for it. But start to really understand FM, start with sine waves, or the simplest, if you don't have a sine wave, triangular wave, the simplest one possible. And by pushing it to move, it will become complex. That's where you start to really get to understand how it works. So that's the second thing. You should only listen to the carrier. So in this case, I use, let's say, oscillator 2 to modulate oscillator 1. Then I should not have it in my sound signal. I should only hear oscillator 1 being modulated. So that would be easier for me to hear what's happening. So that's the third thing. So only hear the one that is the carrier. The modulator should not be sent to the volume. 4, some synthesizers have the LFO that can actually run at higher speed, and they become oscillators. They're not low frequency oscillators anymore. The case of the Peak does that. So you could actually do FM with using the LFO at a higher pitch, higher speed, so it becomes FM for the carrier, the oscillator 1 per se. One of the coolest thing to have with FM is the evolution of the modulation, because if you just bring it in, you're going to have a complex sound. It's going to stay there and very rich. So to have an evolution, you have to find somewhere in your synthesizer the capacity to send something like an envelope to the depth of FM. How much FM synthesis, how much modulation coming, let's say, from oscillator 2 send to oscillator 1 can be, the depth can be controlled. If you can do that, you're going to have cool evolution of these complex waveforms. 6, I think I'm at now. The other thing is that the ratio between the carrier and the modulator will change a lot the sound. So play with it. Play with the fact, if it's at the same speed, you're going to have some frequencies. Interesting. Every time you turn the value of the pitch of the modulator, you will change how the complexity of the carrier will be. And if you're between multiple of harmonics frequencies, you'll get a lot of distortion in harmonics and complex waveform. They are more noisier in a way, but a lot of in harmonics. That's going to be more noisy than harmonics, and it's actually pretty cool. You can create really cool stuff. Like that's why we use a lot of FM synthesis to do bell sounds, because there's harmonics and inharmonics in bell sound. Test out with the modulator being lower in pitch than the carrier. Here what you can do. Sometimes you create these weird, complex, bassy tones. I'll try some of it with you guys. And so playing with the pitch of the modulator is also a cool way to change the complexity of the carrier. Let's test this out. Try to figure out what I just explained and hear what it sounds like. Okay? So I start by initialize the sound. Take an initialized sound and then I play it. Okay, nothing's happening. Very simple. I'm going to go to what I said, a sine wave. Very simple. Okay. What you have here, you want to control the pitch. That's what FM synthesis here. So you want to go and control the pitch. If you use LFO2, like I said earlier, this one can be in the high. So there's a low and there's a high. Let's go high. I'm going to stay in the triangular waveform. I would prefer having a sine wave. In this case, I don't. I have a triangular wave, which is pretty cool also. It's pretty close. So I'm going to just bring the volume up of this here, the depth of LFO2. I'm going to play something just so that I have that wave. So you hear that's just a basic LFO, but bring the speed. Okay, that's slow, LFO. But if I go higher, this becomes FM synthesis. So the depth here decides on how complex the sound is, how much modulation you get. And here you have the ratio, the pitch between the two. Okay? Let's bring that down for now. So if I want to do something that is more like a real classic FM synth, I will take the second oscillator. I don't want to hear it. Okay, so I put it at 0. I don't want to hear the others. I really just want to hear the oscillator 1. Then I'm going to find some way to control how much volume coming out of this can be sent to the first one. Okay, so in this case I'm going to the mod matrix and I'm going to look for something that gives me destination oscillator 1 pitch. That's what I want. Okay, and I want the source to be, here you have it, FM1 sent to 2, FM2 sent to 3, FM3 sent to 1, and noise sent to 1. So let's go and say I want a 3 to be sent to 1. That's the destination. So that's going to be this one here. And I'm going to go here and I'm going to say I want to have, in this case, I'm going to use the modulation envelope 1. Modulation envelope 1. So I'm going to have a little bit of attack, a little bit decay, more decay and some release. Okay, not too much. And I'm going to go back here at the bottom here. I'm going to add some. Okay, and I'm going to go back to mod matrix. Depending on the pitch, you hear the difference. Now I'm lower than the original, so the oscillator 3 is lower than the original oscillator 1 by 1 octave. Listen to that. That's a cool evolution. So these are just FM modulation coming from 3, which is 2 octaves lower than the first one. Now I said don't use other things, but let's try to see if we use an LFO2 here. So the 3, I'm going to modulate it so it becomes complex also, using this. Remember that LFO2 can create FM synthesis, so now oscillator number 3 is being modulated from the LFO2 here, which is high and fast. So this one becomes also FM modulated, and then this controls oscillator 1. If you don't want it to be that obvious. And you also have the choice of changing to a different waveform. Bring that down. This one here. So now it's a sawtooth controlling. This is square wave as the source of modulation. So if we take that out totally, you're going to see how much bass you're losing now. So that's the source, also the number 1. If I modulate with something that is 2 octaves lower, you have all this is and you still have the option of using the filter on top of that, or the distortion. Okay, so that's basically how you approach it, and then you can just play along and create new things. I mean, again, if you go back to the slot here, change the slot number 2. Let's try again another FM. In this case, I'm going to go noise to 1 down here. But you want to have envelope number 2 in this case, envelope modulation number 2. And it's going to be just a fast like this. So the first or okay, so an example of what you can do here. Let's bring that down here. So when you bring the oscillator 3 higher in pitch, so the modulator, you create these bell type of sound. Of course, I've got LFO here moving, boom, 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 but if I go no sustain and even go. So I've got LFO1 modulating oscillator 3 and 3 modulating oscillator 1. It gives you these complex enharmonics content and still kind of a rich, crispy sound. So, and just noisy stuff if you want. So, pretty cool. That's it, guys. This is really just a tips to how to start making your sound and using FM. And a lot of synths have an FM feature. Keep in mind that even the Prophet 5 that existed way before, it existed before the DX7, has FM capacity. The same thing we just explained today. You can do that in the Prophet 5. So it's not new. It's not a new thing. It's basically LFO to a higher pitch. That's what it is. So I hope this actually helps you, play around with your FM synth, making these noisy sound. Of course, FM is super easy to create noisy sound. And some will say, well, it sounds a little bit like ring modulators, sounds a little bit like cross modulation. All of these are not the same thing, but they create sounds and results that are in the same family of complexity because they bring a lot of enharmonics. So yes, in a way, when you listen to the result, they're in the same, ballpark, if you want. They're not the same, they're not equal, they don't react the same way, but the result is in a way somewhat equivalent in the ballpark of the timbre that you get. Okay, so that's it. Have fun with it. And again, if you like what I'm doing, thumb up. If you want to share, go ahead. If you have any comments, put them in. If you have any question, put them in. Today's video was basically a response from a question from a user. So that's it, guys. Cheers.